Fair point. It was. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. I'm going to take off my mouse to talk. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the DBOUND to BOF, which is, in fact, happening after all. Thanks, everybody that has reviewed the program, such as it is, and we'll go ahead and get started. Keep in mind that the question in front of the BOF is whether it makes sense to recharter the DBOUND working group or to start another one in order to address specific use cases and actually get to resolution on those. The note well, everybody's read it, read it again. IETF Code of Conduct, again, common sense. Keep in mind, for in-person participants, you do need to be in MeetEcho. You do need to use MeetEcho to join the mic queue. Keep audio and video off because the in-room AV takes care of that. And please wear masks unless actively speaking at the microphone. Remote, make sure your audio and video are off unless you're chairing or presenting during a session. Use of a headset is strongly recommended. So we have a very informal agenda here. We just need to make sure we get to the right questions and answers. Agenda bash, use case discussions, and finally charter discussion. Marie Kucherawi, who is sitting next to me, smiling behind his mask, is the area director who will have to decide whether to go ahead with rechartering DBOUND. So I believe, certainly he can speak for himself, but I believe the primary question here is what use cases do people have that they are willing to work on and provide solutions for? And will we get to conclusions on addressing those use cases? Does that sound fair? All right, Tim,
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, you want to go through the rest of the
Yeah,
next
some of
slides
these,
here?
sure. Some of
I
this
got
is just sort of picking up from the last meeting. This is like the original BOF request, and I think I dug that out of the data tracker in February. So the previous, as a lot of us know, the previous working group was trying to figure out how to differentiate control between related DNS names. Though it kind of, it concluded in a not very good place. And so a lot of that was, there's been additional work since then, especially in the DMARC group around the public suffix list modification, the PSD we call it. That basically tried to solve some of those problems. And the big question is, did DBound, fail for trying to solve too many problems, or is it an inextractable problem to solve? So if we go to the next slide, I think this was also out of the BOF. Yeah, there is some examples that were in there. This is out of the BOF description about the public suffix list and about modifications may supersede or complement the PSL. And that seems to be the thing that the discussion that seems to wrap a lot of us into where we're going with this. And we're here to see if there's enough consensus to try this again. I believe that's the exact, a good way to view it. That's sort of how I sort of see it. So if we go to the next slide. So the semi-revised problem statement, I spent a lot of time reviewing the original one, and what I really sort of got from the, was there was almost too many use cases, and it seemed to be, we seem to get lost in some of those. And I'm personally a big proponent of of incremental growth sort of thing, is try to solve the 80% problem and then instead of the 100% problem. But that's just personal, and a lot of people have different views of that. So the big thing in the problem statement is the administration relationship between domains, and that seems to be a solution that overwhelms a lot of folks when you try to sort of describe that. And some of the discussions we had back over the last few months in the mailing list, I had worked on some charter text. Based on some of the initial charter text, sort of stripping some pieces out and some other comments. We had some good feedback, but some of the discussion that came up was, do we need to duplicate the PSL and what's involved with that? And we had opinions on both sides, and I have no opinion on that. I'd like to hear, my opinion is, let's see what people say. It seems to really wrap the group into a knot when we start going down that road. And so, I've always wondered, is that, the right way to go? So, and a lot of these are sort of talking points to try to get the room sort of commenting on stuff. How do they feel about things? So, we definitely want to hear about this. So if we go to the next slide. Yes, I kind of wonder, I posit that should we focus on a smaller set of use cases? Is that a better way to sort of make some headway? And starting with some of the sort of straightforward ones, state management cookies and the certs, especially the wildcard certs, those seem to be use cases that we understand really well, or at least we understand how we want to get to some solution on those. So yes, if we go and especially in the use case now, one of the big use cases in the original problem statement was about DMARC and stuff, and that's been, I feel that's been taken off the table. I think even the DMARC people would sort of agree to that, because we've made some good progress using the PSD. So I see Barry and John there in the front. So being fellow DMARC people, they will have strong, opinions about whether or not I'm speaking out of turn or not. So if we go to the next slide. There's a couple people that want to talk, which I'm really happy for. So Paul is going to want to talk about the supplement to the PSL for people who want a second set of data. And then Ian, and I'm sorry, Ian, somehow when I was typing your name in off your email, I got I apologize. and they had Ian from AWS has an interesting use case about publishing their information in a distributed fashion. So, so it'd be good to sort of hear from both of those folks. I know Paul doesn't have any slides and he can just talk. He's really good at that. So, Paul, if you'd like to sort of wander up to the mic and say your piece, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before, no, come on up. Well, just before you, I'm going to ask for any other use cases people want to talk about or any other agenda bash, just so we know how to manage the time.
Yes. This is really free form. We just want people to talk about stuff and sort of get some strong feedback. So thanks.
Okay. And I am not seeing anyone at the mic. So go ahead, Paul.
You see me at the mic? I'm sorry.
Different mic.
How can you miss me? So my use case is actually not like I need this data for this, but I know, for example, the browser vendors use the PSL. They know the limitations of the PSL. They are fine with the limitations, because if they weren't fine with the limitations, they have the power to change it. But the PSL has on purpose some limitations that affect other people who want to use the PSL as a base, but know that, oh, there's a bunch of names that aren't in the PSL that could be in there if the people could get it into the PSL, but they can't for various reasons. They don't know how to use GitHub. They tried, they got rejected, such like that. So my use case is actually, Tim used the word supplement here, but he actually on a couple slides earlier had, I think, a better word, which is complement the PSL. No replacement of the PSL. That is, anyone who wants to replace the PSL can, but my use case is taking the current data of the PSL and allowing additional people who have control over the contents of their own zone to put in records which will add to the PSL. So and again, we all know the problem of trying to merge two databases. You either say, great, all the records in database B are not in A, so we can add them cleanly. That never happens, or it happens for 5 minutes until we let somebody else in. Or a bunch of records from database B are new, and therefore they can be added in. And then there are some problematic ones where a record in A and B both exist, and they maybe disagree on the metadata. That, for me, is out of scope, because the person who's using this merged data can decide for themselves how to deal with those problems. That's not a protocol issue. That's something that users can do. So the use case is simply to say the PSL collects data in a certain way. It has for a long time. It has certain users already. The current users of the PSL might want people with control over their own zone to be able to add in without going to the PSL, without relying on, there's often delays in the PSL, whatever. And I'm not criticizing the PSL at all. It's volunteer run. It's been, run forever, and it is being run by the primary users of it, which are the browsers. But being able to supplement or complement it with a DNS-based protocol would allow somebody who says, I want more than the PSL, and the only people I want are people who control a zone to do that. And so it's quite easy. You set up something like a protocol like we have examples of, and then somebody collects both of them. You grab the PSL, and you have a way of not automatically discovering, but being able to catch all the zones that have done it. And that's not in scope for the use case. And then you've got a service that adds the two of them together and calls out this one, this is B in B, not in A. You can add it safely. Here are some conflicts. So that's my use case. Do we want questions on the individual? So questions on that before, a completely different one.
Yeah, we have some time here. Questions, comments?
It's the end of the day, Ecker. Speak at like 0.7, please.
So, oh, Mark. So I guess I'm not, I thought I heard you say two different things and I'm not sure which
Okay.
one we're talking about.
I might have said two.
One
different
is that this is an alternative mechanism for submitting to the PSL.
No, I didn't
Okay.
say that.
Okay. Do we?
It is an alternative for somebody who wants the larger set of data. They'll take the PSL as it is, whatever that means in the future, and then this additional data.
Do we know some people who want that?
I have heard from, actually informally, from some browser vendors that they wished this, but not wished it enough to improve the PSL.
Okay. Was that us?
Yes, it was, as a matter of fact. So that
Okay.
may no longer be true.
Well, it may still be true. I don't know about it.
Right.
I'm just,
There have also been
if it's us, I could probably dig into it.
right. There have also been people who said, I would use the PSL data if I knew that some of these cases could go in. I don't know their actual use for it. I can't say it would be for this protocol, but they felt that the collection mechanism of the PSL was wrong. Now, what they were saying is, we need to fix the PSL, and
Sure.
I tried to get them to back off of that because we don't need to do any of that. It's running just fine for the people who are using it.
I'm not sure that's as true as you might think, but it's running enough that we're not fixing it.
Actually, I disagree, Ecker. I truly believe it is as good as it could be for the people using it, because you could fix it if not.
That's quite a assumption of rationality on our part, but okay.
Okay, yeah.
Mark Nottingham. Hey, Paul. I don't mean to be pedantic, but I'm going to be anyway.
Please, no, I
This
like
isn't a use case. This is an implementation strategy or maybe an assemblage that recognizes the political realities that you're trying to work around, but it's not a
I
use
agree.
case.
I agree. It's not a clean use case on its own. I fully agree.
Well, it's not at all.
I disagree. It is a use case for people who already know how to use the PSL and want it different. It's not a clean use case that says, I want to. And I
We'll
started
have a
that.
beer over what the words use case mean.
Okay. So we both can be pedantic. So good. End of line. We can go to a new person. Unless there's anyone in.
And yeah, I'm hearing something in the back of the room. Anybody else at the microphone?
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. Well, if you don't mind. That might be. Can you do it? Okay, that's right, you can't. That's right. All right. Meeting material.
I'm hoping for slides here in a moment.
Yeah, they'll be here. That's not working the way it should be. No, I got it. No, I can do it.
Oh, okay.
No, I can do it. All the slots for the current meeting are taken, which means I have to exit out of the. Technical difficulties, standing by. All right. I think I actually kicked myself out of Meetup. Because I am talented and not at all tired. Okay.
Do you want me to just start with that?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
All right. In that case, I have a copy of the slides on my phone. So,
Well done. I'll
Ian
be with
Williams,
you in a second.
Ian Williams with AWS. Some of the things I'll talk about, for the most part, are not so much on the consumer. I'm going to put this down on the consumer side of the public suffix list, but more on the producer side. Public suffix list or similar technology. I'll use PSL as a handy talking point here. Is for the most part a pipeline, right? We have producers and consumers. Consumers could be user agents, browsers. In the DMARC, sense, it could have been a mail agent or something of that nature. But anyhow, most of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is on the producer side. I did want to mention the why now portion because that was part of the concerns. Is like why should debound be rehydrated? Why should we bring it back up? I think versus when it was previously reviewed, circa 2016, I think was the last time. There's been a lot of changes kind of in internet space as a whole. We still have the problem in question, right? Even if there wasn't any history, like it's still something that we would have. Slide 2, if you could.
Yep.
There we go. Perfect. All right, now I can get rid of this. Anyhow, so infrastructure's matured since the last time this was reviewed. We're seeing more and more multi-tenant environments are common within business applications and such. Cloud environments being very popular there. The scaling issues that we're seeing in 2016 are slightly different. In something like a cloud environment, you've got significant number of tenants sharing, something such as a single DNS zone, and a smaller set of use cases might be expected. As we've mentioned, I don't want to beat the dead horse, but DMARC took their toys and went to a different sandbox, which is totally fine. Next slide, please. So part of what I mentioned on the mailing list was that we're looking for something more decentralized and distributed versus what is currently with the PSL. So how do we emit something that is PSL-like in details, but for the most part, something that is more decentralized? Next slide. So a little bit about kind of how services are at AWS. We have a lot of different service teams, many service teams. And they are the owners of all facets of their service. That includes operational excellence and security and all kinds of other things. Specialist teams advise them, such as security teams like myself and others. But for the most part, we want to try and enable these service teams to be self-sufficient and be able to operate by themselves. Something with kind of decentralizing this. That would include moving away from a centralized model where there's a single list or a single registry and letting people maintain their own records for this type of technology. Next slide. So there was some discussion in the Zulip, what's the terminology? Topic stream channel? I don't know. Some discussion on Zulip about single points of failure being an issue here. Totally agree. Whether that's something external to a given organization or even internal, like single teams anywhere don't scale well. Having something that's self-service, such as I mentioned DNS here, just because it's easy to delegate, that would be ideal for something large and distributed like a cloud environment or something similar. Next slide. So talking about distribution, this is kind of the other major issue that we have, or distributed nature, excuse me. Next slide. In our case, and we feel that this is applicable of many other cloud providers, not just AWS, but other providers as well. For the most part, our resources, this is all explained on the mailing list as well, if anyone wants to go and take a peek. We have DNS records per service, per region. So as we see more services launch into more regions, that's a significant number of DNS records and a significant number of things that would have to be emitted to something similar to the PSL. Whether that's an internal team with an AWS or an internal team somewhere or a team somewhere else, that's a lot of impact to put on anyone or any one team. With our case, that's multiple times a year we have multiple services in multiple regions. It's just a significant amount of scale. You can think of it as just a really large multi-tenant environment with rapid growth. And that's optimally something that we wouldn't want to put onto any one piece of technology, whether that's PSL or something similar. Next slide. So it comes down to like, how do we want to publish this? The current mechanism with the PSL requires some level of aggregation. We've worked with PSL maintainers to kind of have a aggregation process that we're using right now. But with any single point of failure, whether that's internal to a company or just relying on an external team, it's difficult to scale. If we move towards a more decentralized model that lets service teams at different companies, different cloud providers, et cetera, do this self-service and makes it significantly easier for them to secure their users and overall raise the bar for security on the internet. So I think I have one more slide. The other thing that we mentioned too is private and disconnected networks. Right now with PSL, there's very little support for these, and that's kind of expected to keep the size of the list down, just because there's no way to assert that or that you have ownership of that private intranet, not internet network. In cases like these, you may have multiple distinct administrative entities on those segregated networks. And if that's the case, then you may want to represent that one resource shouldn't be trusted versus another resource. And that might be something where the PSL would be useful. Next slide, please. Some other use cases that the PSL currently supports that we agree with. I mean, we're a large DNS provider, which I know if we're looking at going the DNS route for debound, that would be something we'd be interested in. We also currently use PSL kind of as a wide impact check. I know that it's well, I shouldn't say very easy, but there's not a whole lot of you can get onto the PSL as an individual or as a bad actor or something, but we do use it in a number of fashions for kind of like a are you sure type of check, human intervention. And then obviously how the browsers consume it, for the most part, that's matching other internal logic we have. So browsers et al. There is appropriate. And I think that's it. I see 2 questions in the queue.
Hi, this is Daniel Gilmore. So I wanted to maybe try to zoom in a little bit because I feel like you just presented many, many different possible use cases, and I maybe only understood a quarter of them because I don't run the Amazon data center. And I don't know if anybody else in the room is feeling the same way, but yeah, there's a lot of things that could be listed. A single centralized public suffix list doesn't work for all of those. But for the context of this BOF, is there a specific thing that you think dbound could do? And so I was around for the first iteration of this group. I think we should have done it then. We didn't. There were, I think, 3 major points of architectural choice that we had there. And I want to know whether any one of these 3 would satisfy what you think are the highest priority things, or whether you think that you want all of them. Because if you want all of them, we're going to run into the same spot that we did last time. So one is, this gives you a way as a domain name owner to signal something that everybody below you will notice. Another one is a way that you can signal as a domain name owner that you are distinct from the folks above you in the hierarchy. And the third thing is you want to signal as a domain name owner some sort of cross-domain linkage to somewhere else in the tree, not strictly a descendant or strictly an ancestor. Do you want all of those things? Do you want just the one? Which of those types of architectural things would solve the use cases that you're describing that I don't understand?
Probably point 1 for the most part. I would say the third point you mentioned, where it's say sibling or some other disparate part of the tree, I don't think is for the most part as useful. I mean, I can't speak for every single use case, right? But that is the point of standing up here and talking about our use case. For the most part, I think that it would mostly be point 1, just because that's somewhere where we can, as an infrastructure operator, say we own this bit, and our customers own that bit, and there's many customers there. So don't assign them the same level of trust. Okay. So for the most part, point 1 is, I think, the most important part for us.
Okay, thanks.
Eric Scorla. So I guess I'm a little could you maybe go back a couple slides to the scaling point you made?
Scaling point?
Just maybe start from the beginning and page through, and I'll tell you when to stop. Right, I think so, so yeah, so down one. Down one,
One more slide.
next. Yeah, there we go. So I mean, I guess like the current PSL has 14,000 records in it.
Mhm.
So like, while I certainly appreciate that they've considered out single points of failure, if we can't like figure out how to distribute a 14,000 line file to people, like in a scalable fashion, like that seems like we got bigger problems than like, so like, so I guess like, do you have a theory in which there's going to be many, many more entries? Like a lot more, like 2 orders of magnitude more?
So the example that we had, and I'm trying it's very hard to remember the stats that I pulled before this meeting. There's something like, I think, 200 something services that we have, just as an example, right? As a large cloud operator, something like 200 services, and I want to say like 30-ish regions, and both of those numbers grow on a regular basis, right? So if we presume that there is at least one entry per region per region per service, and that's going to grow significantly. With one cloud provider, we would take up somewhere
That's like 6,000?
6,000, but that's a significant chunk of the list.
Sure,
Then
I
we have-
understand, but like, I mean, it's like, you're telling me a story where like made 50,000 entries. And like, again, like,
Correct, but we're not the only.
well, no,
cloud
but you
provider.
said 6,000, you have 6,000, there's like how many, there's like 5 big cloud providers, that's 30,000, so now we're at 50,000. That's like still a very small number. So like, I guess I'm like, what I'm trying to push on is like, is that there's like the question of like how to like efficiently add items to the list. And there's a question how to efficiently distribute a list. But any list that is like smaller than like a megabyte, like it's just really much easier to distribute, like the way we're distributing it now by like doubling off GitHub or something. So like, I'm trying to understand like, and so it's like, I understand people are sad about like how like the performance of like PSL adding. But like, I think it's really important to separate the question of should it be more efficient to add things to the PSL from the question of should we have it decide a new mechanism to distribute the contents of the PSL. And like I think those are like different questions, and I think we should probably try to separate them. And I think unless you're anticipating it really getting much, much larger, I think only the first of those is like probably something we're solving.
Yeah, the expectation is that it would grow. Obviously, like I can't speak on behalf of every single infrastructure provider or other cloud provider or so on, but the expectation is that if we were to go and emit everything possible to the list, then we would significantly swallow what the current what you said, like 14,000.
I understand that, but I guess I'm just saying that like downloading it off like GitHub.io is like efficient for a much larger list than we have now, right? Like you don't need a distributed database. In the modern internet, you don't need a distributed database until things get extraordinarily large, like much, much larger.
And part of the issue too is again the concept of things that like we couldn't pre-compile beforehand. The private cloud or the private decentralized intranet idea was part of that as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Wes Hardiker, ISI and ICANN board, definitely not speaking for the ICANN board. Let me ask, I think what Ecker was asking in a different way, which is what is the rate of change that you're needing to add and remove stuff, right? Because that's the other reason. It's not just that adding is hard and you have to go through pull requests and all that type of stuff, but how frequently are you needing to update, your notion of what a PSL list is?
That's a good question. So part of what we agreed with the PSL maintainers was that we would limit our contributions to, I believe, 4 times a year. The expectation is that those contributions would be more timely if it was a self-service approach.
Right. So it's actually that second one I want to know. What would your ideal rate be? Like, what would you do if you didn't have to limit yourself to 4 times a year?
If it was something where it was fully self-service, I mean, crystal ball's cloudy, but for the most part, I would expect it to be something on the order of daily, where we have service teams that are doing launches on a daily basis, and if we expect them to be fully self-service, then that would be something that they would do themselves. Does that make sense?
Hi, I'm Andrew Sullivan, and even though I work for somebody, I don't speak for them. I want to pile on what you're saying right now, because in fact, when we talked about this back when the first iteration of this endless cycle got started, the vision really was to be able to put these things into zones, partly in order to respond to this kind of stuff, because I mean, I appreciate what Ecker's saying about the size of this thing, but the truth of the matter is, like, we could also go back to FTPing a host.txt file every day, and put the entire DNS in, and that would work fine too. But like, we decided to stop doing that because of the advantages of distributed management. And I think there are really two pieces here, and the advantages of distributed management are not being appreciated, perhaps, to the extent that that they might otherwise be. So I think that there really is this notion that the zone operator is sort of the authority over what's going on in there. And what we have failed to appreciate, I think, because of the way the DNS works, is the zone cut authority and the authority over what's included are not really the same thing. And we're missing one of those ideas. And that was what caused the various three things that DKG was talking about earlier. That's what caused those all to show up in the past, because it turns out if you do the analysis, really understanding policy authority over like what I'm talking about and how these things are related to one another is fundamental to the problem that you're trying to solve. So it collapses to the same kind of idea. I mean, I don't really care which use case it is, but it really turns out that if you want to talk about which stuff is inside and which stuff is outside, and what am I allowed to assert about this cone that I'm operating in, then you need to stop worrying about zone cuts, and you need to start worrying about what can I assert about a given set of domain names. So that was anyway what was driving me in the first place, and it was exactly these kinds of use cases that I think was driving me anyway when I worked at a former employer.
All right. I'm not having a good day with technology. Okay, so that's the use cases we had planned to discuss. We can move to sort of the general question that I think Andrew particularly was asking. Do people have views on, do we have solvable use cases here? What has changed that might lead to solving identifiable problems in finite time? Any further perspectives on where we might have gone off the rails before, or how to address things differently this time, or how much the situation has changed to justify taking another run at it? Did you want to go back?
No.
Okay.
Andrew's in the queue again, or unless you never left. Oh, okay, then Priyanka.
Hi, Priyanka here. I was just wondering that the universal accessibility thing is part of ICANN, right? But it will have impact over here, is a question I have. Because if it does, then I have further questions.
Martin's coming. No, actually, here, let someone who's not part of ICANN answer.
Okay, I think
Your name,
somebody
please?
explained that, my name is Martin Durst. Somebody before, I'm bad at names, sorry, but somebody before explained that there are three ideas, and one was to connect different domains that are not directly in the same tree. And one application of that would be to connect a domain maybe in some indic, with some indic domain name and some English or various different indic domain names. So there is a connection there, at least one.
Okay, because I have concerns regarding the .bangla and .bangla.bharat domains, which I feel on ground from my experience with the groups there may lead to homogenization, forced homogenization of cultures. So yeah, so I feel that whether you have more representation when you are making these decisions, design decisions, engineering decisions on that.
Thank you. Everybody is welcome. Thank you for
Yep.
commenting. Paul, go ahead.
So Paul Hoffman, who works at ICANN, but definitely not in the area that you're asking about. Here, I'll do it this way since we are humans. Of the three potential use cases, Martin brought up the one that might actually affect you, but there hasn't been any interest in the room yet on that one. And as the chairs were showing where we have had failings earlier, because it got too complicated. It was exactly that. And partially for the reason you brought up is that somebody claiming an association, that somebody would look at half of the claim, they wouldn't look at the other half and do that. I believe at this point, it's unlikely that this group would do that, would go to those things, partially for what you're bringing up, but also partially because, oh my God, this is really, really hard. So for now, I would say your concern is alleviated due to lack of interest in doing that. But it is something we should stay aware of.
Okay,
Yep.
maybe we should talk offline.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Comments, questions?
Werner Staub. One of the things that we've been using the public suffix list for is its name. Is it somebody where somebody can publicly register domain name because it's open to the public, meaning that it is not under the responsibility of the parent domain. The responsibility has been handed to somebody else. Now, it is actually unclear, if you say, co.uk, that is not, it is a public suffix. It is not somebody owning this. But then you have .ibm. No, that is not, it's not a TLD in the sense that other people are going to register inside, but it's still in the public suffix list. So actually we have a contradiction there. It was practical from the purpose in which, the public suffix list was created, that brand TLDs would be just regarded public suffix, even though they're evidently not public. They're supposed to be specific to the realm of that organization. If you extend that, it is just that we have types of responsibility that are described, and there's not just one type of responsibility. So seeing a restriction, you just want to talk about one thing is maybe the wrong way about it. Maybe the best way about it is to say, we want to describe, give a language to describe where some responsibility starts and other responsibilities ends, and define what kind of responsibility that is.
So do you feel that's a clearly defined use case for a different solution or a clearly defined problem that DBOUND would address?
I think it is a defined use case because the DNS industry owes it to the public to be clear about what things are. And right now it is impossible for somebody who doesn't happen to know what the relationship is. If you just don't know, you wouldn't know that .ibm is not a public TLD. The same thing is what we had before between links between IDN top level domains and that they're CCTLDs, and they're specifically related to a place, and others that are not. It is a kind of responsibility, but it's more granular than just saying it's a definition of a zone cut.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Paul Hoffman, if I can restate this more in engineering terms, I think what Werner is asking for is metadata beyond straight, I'm above, I'm below. And that would be a use case. I assure you, working at ICANN, we ain't doing that very well right now. I'm not sure that someone would do it better, but in my use case, I stayed away from what kind of metadata, and I think what Werner's saying, he has a use case for specific metadata on abilities to be either registered or whatever, but still in the hierarchical sense, not in the sibling sense.
Okay, thanks. Dan.
This is Daniel. So I just wanted to push back a little bit on the idea that the public suffix list is actually about public registrations. I don't know that it ever was. and this is maybe a subtle nitpicky point. I think the idea was that the public suffix list was a list of domains where you could not guarantee the same administrative control under that cut, immediately at that cut. So it doesn't mean that anybody in the whole world who is public could register there. It just means don't treat these as automatically within the same contiguous zone because they share the same parent, if that makes sense. That's not the same thing as anybody can publicly register.
Okay. John, I guess, is next. Thank you.
Yeah, John Levine. Yeah, apropos of Werner's comment, I think the actual, there's a technical issue that when they first set up. Hello?
Much better. Thank you.
Too damn low. I think apropos of Werner's point, I think there's just simply a technical issue that when the PSL was invented, it never occurred to them that there would be single user vanity TLDs. So it simply has no way to represent them. But I'm hearing people talk past each other. I mean, I hear like why people would like to publish lots of names at, like I understand why AWS wants to publish thousands of names. I also understand, I mean, having talked at some length to Jonathan, I also understand why the people who maintain the PSL absolutely do not want it to be self-service. They want to be able to make, because they believe they see malicious submissions that they would not accept, which of course you couldn't fix with self-service. And I mean, I also hear Andrew's point where the PSL currently verifies that entries are at least plausible by requiring you to put a tag record in your zone to show that you have some control over the name that you're asking them to add to it. But and finally, with respect to Ecker's point, it's like he's right. If we had a million, I mean, technically you could like self-publish and have something that collected all the names every day, and you'd have 1 megabyte file, and people could download it if they want. So I'm not so much worried about the publication thing, but I really think we need to clarify if we're going to do a debound thing, we need to be really clear on what the process is for people to establish that they have the authority to add an entry, because I think that's really the hardest part. Beyond that, it's all kind of software that we can fix.
Okay, I'm going to close the queue behind Stefan because we do still need to get to the BOF questions for Murray. But go ahead.
Yeah, Andrew Sullivan again. And I still work for somebody as far as I know, but I still must speak for them. So I disagree pretty strongly with what John just said. Because, well, sort of two things. First of all, the PSL doesn't have anything to do with zone cuts, because there's lots of stuff in there that like is inside the same zone, and that's been another problem that's been part of the issue. But more importantly, this isn't like just like a question of like how do we distribute this and all the rest of it. It really boils down to a question of which problem are we trying to solve. And I think this is the place at which we foundered the last time. And if there's any hope in this BOF, it's because we seem to have cut off one of the things. So last time there were two kinds of questions. One about like, do I want to be able to assert things about things that are below me, or do I want to be able to not assert things about things that are below me? That is, I've got agreement across this boundary, whatever it is, or one of these people can assert it about the other one, and a positive assertion about the other one. So that was the sort of demarc case, and it sounds like we've cut that one off. So now the question is only, is this an inclusive model or an exclusive model? That is, do I have to have agreement across these things, or do I, is just one side sort of making exclusionary statements or whatever? If it is, you have to have agreement across the two sides of whatever the boundary is supposed to be, then actually the question of whether it's across the tree or up and down the tree or any of those things all goes away, because it's all the same problem, which is you've got two sides of a boundary of some kind of a domain boundary, And whether these are names that are strictly speaking related to one another in the tree or not is irrelevant because they both have to assert something. Or is it only one side that needs to assert something? And I think if you could get that question on the table and make a decision about which way you want to go, then that would tell you whether you've got a new problem here or the same problem that we just didn't solve the last time, partly because we couldn't decide about whether we were asserting downwards or not. So that maybe gives you a path through here.
Yeah, Philip is next. Thank you.
Hi. Philip
Stefan Bortsmeyer.
Stefan?
No, oh, sorry.
Not quite.
Sorry.
Philip Tiesel, SAP. So I agree that the idea of this sheer amount of data in the PSL could be published, but if I look at use cases in public cloud scenarios or extension scenarios, you often find customers going below a certain TLD or a certain special domain, and then cutting the individual trust models across these customers becomes very complicated. Doing this statically in a slow process is very complicated. Doing this with DNS seems feasible. And so I see the use cases, especially for both, for saying, okay, I don't trust the DNS level above me, or beware where below this DNS level, the domains can contain customer managed data or customer extension programs that aren't trusted anymore. I think the third point is interesting, but it's too complicated. So I would also say the first use cases apply for us. And I think also being able to remove entries from the list will be interesting on the long way, because cloud workloads are much more volatile than this original idea of hosting in the PSL.
Thank you. Stefan?
Stefan Bortsmeyer. Regarding the case of .ibm, which was mentioned by Werner, the problem is not that it is publicly accessible by anyone, because we have for a long time TLD with registration which are not open to the public. .gov is a typical example. It's not open to the public, but there is little doubt that cnet.gov and house.gov are two different domains and under two different administrations. So the real problem is not whether or not it's accessible to the public, but whether or not the subdomains are in different organizations or not. So in that case, yes, clearly having .ibm in the public suffix list seems clearly a mistake to me. But there is behind it, there is another mistake, that who should decide if IBM is a suffix, a registration suffix or not? Clearly, it should be the domain name holder, the IBM company in that case, and that's the biggest problem with the PSL. It's not a technical problem. The PSL work, I use it, but the biggest problem is who will decide that this or this TLD is a registration domain. And so clearly it has to be decentralized.
Thank you. I think we're almost out of time. Do you want to go ahead and...
So I'm not hearing a lot of, I'm not feeling very confident that there's that this is the right time to say, yes, we're ready to recharter. It seems, first of all, we don't have a new charter to look at, which usually that's a necessary piece of a BOF, but we're relying on the history that this was once a chartered working group. So does anybody want to make an argument that this is ready to charter? I don't think so, right? So, but it sounds like we have some problem, a problem statement that may be trying to gel. My impression is that this should go back to the list to develop this a little bit more, and then we can try this again, an in-person or a virtual BOF at some point between now and the next meeting. Does anybody think that's a bad idea? That path is better than? Is there another option? Go ahead, Paul.
So Paul Hoffman,
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing. You as AD, would you prefer, instead of us starting over, that we take a previous charter and hone it, or would you prefer that we started from scratch?
I don't think I have a strong preference. I think raw materials are great to start with, but if we're basically working on half of the original problem, then I think probably starting from scratch with context is better than trying to hack on the old charter. Does anybody, let me ask a couple of sort of simple questions though. Does anybody believe this should not be done here? I think that we're okay. We're generally okay thinking this is the right venue for IETF being the right venue for this work, right? Okay. Just sometimes the answer to that is no, and I thought I would ask the question anyway. I don't think that I need more information than what we've got here, unless someone wants to provide, further guidance or advice, or have input to that process. Go ahead, Wes.
No hats. Thank you, Paul. So this is Wes, and it sounds to me like there's consensus around use cases that I think people generally agree upon. What I wonder, and I think where things went awry last time was, is there going to be any agreement on a technical solution that could be an adoptable draft? So a really successful BOF, of which there probably are none, has a charter. It has, a defined scope and problem statement. And ideally, some draft that there's at least the beginning of Rust consensus behind. And so everything that we've talked about today is really the problem space, which is great. But I haven't heard a whole lot of clarification in terms of, is there a success story after the problem space?
Right, I agree. So some of those basic building blocks for a successful BOF, maybe we should say, please go off and work on those, and let's try again in July. Send drafts, please. Actually, there's a couple of questions we can ask here. Compared to the audience that we had, the participants that we had last time, this room is pretty full. Although that was also true for the original DBOUND BOF, and by the time we actually finished that working group, it was the two chairs and two people in a room trying to figure out if there's anything we can salvage. So let me ask this question: is who would be willing to work on documents or review documents? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I'm seeing like 8 or 9. And Tim, and Tim, and anybody who's remote, please, just say something. Okay. So I think that's go ahead, Paul.
Marty?
Yeah.
Is that enough in your mind?
It's fewer than I was thinking. So everybody else in here is probably just cruising, right? I mean, it's more than we ended DBOUND with last time. It's
more than 0. Yes.
Right. So I mean, Paul Vixie's not here, and he was very vocal about getting this going again. So there's some remote people we probably can rely on. I think that let's see what happens when we say, please go back and work on charters and drafts, and see if that stirs up some, if that count improves or declines as a result of saying there's actually work to do now. Does that sound reasonable? Is anybody going to set me straight?
Just as a question, one of the things we didn't do the last time was to mention the PSL.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot of stuff here about either like my suggestion of adding to or whatever. Are you okay with a charter that actually talks about the PSL as well?
Like explains why it's not adequate for whatever the use case is?
Or yes, that actually comes in and names it.
Sure.
Okay. I didn't want to assume.
No, I don't recall that we explicitly left it out last time because we were afraid of hurting feelings or anything like that. I remember during the BOF, the PSL people came and talked to us about these are the decisions we've made. This is why it's managed this way, and so forth. So, no, I can't imagine why that would be a useful constraint. Ben Schwartz.
Hey. Is Ben in the room?
Oh, there you are.
Fab.
That for this to be successful, I think really you do need active participation from some of the PSL maintainers.
What was the first part of it? I didn't catch the first part of what Ben said. Tim, go ahead.
I think Ben was saying about we need active participation from the PSL folks. And it's not that I disagree, because I think they have a lot of useful information, but if we're not trying to replace it, then we're not trying to sort of step all over them. We're just trying to come up with a different solution that kind of works in our space. That space being more of the domains itself. And maybe I'm totally off base on that, but I think that's how we get ourselves really tied up, is when, we don't want to replace it. We want to build something. And Paul's kind of comment about complementing / supplementing it, it's something we really need to sort of like take to heart a little bit more. So thanks.
We're at time.
We are at time, and I think we can call this a success in that Murray has heard what he needed to hear, one way or another. Thanks, everybody, for attending and participating. And we will probably update on the mailing list, I guess.
Yeah, get your chartering energy ready.
Charters and drafts. Thanks, everybody. We're done. Sorry about that. It happens. Many things.